Gopichan Bala Girivaran Hari Gopichan Bala Girivaran Hari Saranandana Rajajan Ranjana Saranandana Rajajan Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. So, Hare Krishna, welcome again to yet another Srimad Bhagavatam class, reading in the second canto. What's your chapter called? Yeah, but I don't want you to answer that question. We're on chapter 7, but what? Thank you. Just checking on your memory. Yes, incarnations. We're on the incarnations of the Lord. Our verses are 36 to 39. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So does anybody have a clue why we're saying Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya before Bhagavatam class?
Call forth the presence of the Lord.
That's totally true. And why Vasudev? Why not Om Namo Bhagavate Krishnaya? Or
Vasudev is Supreme Lord.
He is the Supreme Lord. Very good. He's not negative there, but it's okay. Great try. Vyasadev's the compiler, because the Bhagavatam is eternally existing, but sometimes it gets lost in space and he compiles it. Okay, but Vasudev, particularly the Supreme Lord, but Vasudev is the Lord of consciousness. So we're appealing to the Lord of consciousness to please purify our consciousness so that we can ultimately, in the long run, in due course of time, understand the real purport and the import of Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, I just thought I'd mention that because sometimes we forget those reasons. We just do things mechanically. My middle name, mechanical. Okay, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And then we have our prayers. Okay, we can say these together. Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayat nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamashloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremest human being, under Mother Saraswati, the goddess of mercy, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and Srila Prabhupada, the translator and commentator. And why? Because if we didn't have the translation, we didn't have the explanation, what would you understand? We wouldn't understand anything. So it's very important to offer our respects to Srila Prabhupada. And then what happens? By regular attendance in the classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost destroyed. Loving service unto the personality of Godhead, whose praise or transcendental song is established as an irrevocable fact. So how many pure devotees there are that we can offer our service to? One or two? Oh no, only one or two, and we're going to see them? What'd you say, Gopal? Oh, there's unlimited Vaishnavas. Oh, thanks for reminding me. Okay, so that it's not that we're just rendering service to, perhaps your spiritual master if you've taken initiation, or one or two people, but we're rendering service to everyone, because everyone who comes in contact with Krishna consciousness and takes it a tad seriously gets focused in on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Srila Prabhupada would say that's a sign of a pure devotee, that they have Krishna as the ultimate goal of their life. We may be imperfect along the path, but because our intention is to serve the Lord and our intention is to give our love to the Supreme Lord, that makes one gradually purified. Okay, so then I'm going to offer my prayers. Oma Gyana Timirandasya Janandana Salakaya Chaksu Umilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born into the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master very kindly, forcefully opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. And therefore, it's a debt that I have to Srila Prabhupada that there's no way that I can repay it, but I'm going to try. And try, birth after birth. Okay, so we're on text 36. Let's read the translation in English. And President has the microphone ready, so she's going to be the starter.
The Lord himself, in his incarnation of the son of Satyavati, Vyasadeva, will consider his compilation of Vedic literature very difficult, less intelligent persons in short life. And thus he will divide the tree of Vedic knowledge into inner branches according to the circumstances.
So there's a lot condensed in these verses here. And just by the nature of the chapter, it's just giving a brief explanation of different personalities and different different activities that they did. So Vyasadeva, it's so interesting because in traditional culture, in traditional Vedic culture, your birth is very important. Why is your birth important? Because based on your past activities, you take birth according to what you deserve or your qualifications. So some people take birth in well-to-do families, well-positioned families. Some people take birth in very spiritually inclined families, Brahminical families, and they develop that culture from the very beginning because of previous activities that they performed. But birth isn't the all in all. And that's repeatedly stressed, particularly by Srila Prabhupada. Birth isn't the all in all. It can, when the system degrades and people think that birth is the prominent feature, they're actually missing the point. It's actually what's the prominent feature of every living entity is qualities and characteristics, what they exhibit. So Srila Prabhupada would often say, somebody who's born in a low family, but if they're exhibiting qualities of cleanliness, truthfulness, et cetera, and an inclination to the scripture, then they're considered an elevated personality. There might be different karmic reasons that they were born that way, but their qualities need to be developed. When the system degrades and only birthright is considered important, where you're born, then all sorts of anomalies happen in society. So why am I saying that? Because Vyasadeva, the compiler of the Vedic literature, he's an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. He's a Shaktavesh avatar of the Lord. He had a very unusual birth. You know, he had what would be considered a low birth. His mother, Satyavati, was a fisherwoman who happened to get married to a king. So, you know, you would, according to, you know, the strict rules of birthright, you would think, ew. But by his qualities, he exhibited these things. So Krishna, especially in the Bhagavatam, there's so many circumstances like that, that where socially acceptable or socially, or traditional social norms are broken by persons of transcendental knowledge. For example, in the story of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, the two brothers that were born, demoniac brothers that were born. Hold on, I have to think of the pastime. No, it wasn't that. Uh-oh. It was sorry, I can't remember exact the story, but the story is that there was a king, a king who was killed in a fight, and he was, even though he was determined to conquer his enemies, somehow or other he was killed. So he was killed, and his last expression, facial expression, he was biting his lip in determination, you know, but still he was killed. Anyway, so his queens, when the king was killed on the battlefield, his queens came and they were lamenting over his dead body. And they were lamenting so strongly and so vehemently that they wouldn't allow the body to be taken away, to be cremated at the proper time. And that caught the attention of many saintly personalities. And so this one 5-year-old boy comes before them and says, and he speaks Vedic knowledge. Can you remember the story better than that? I mean, the details? If you can, speak up. Yeah, I'm trying. It was
quoted by
yeah, in his, yeah,
because he was speaking this philosophy about how you're not his body.
right.
Telling the story.
Okay, so, and I think the king's name who was killed, his name was Suyagya. But anyway, aside from my vague details of the background, let's, yeah, the child was Yamaraj. He came in the form and he spoke Vedic knowledge to remind these ladies that this is the material world, life is temporary, where birth, death, old age, and disease can't be avoided, and the higher principle is cultivate spiritual knowledge. So my point is that normally adults are not taking instructions from 5-year-old kids, right? Under normal circumstances. So that, and now Srimad Bhagavatam breaks the norms of traditional circumstances very often, you know. And so Vyasadeva also in his birth, quote unquote, considered a low birth, is compiling the Veda. He's an avatar of the Lord, etc., etc. I better get going to the verse, right? Sorry. Go to the next verse. Surya Radha, can you read one, please? 37. Yeah.
When the atheists, after being well versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilates in inhabitants of different planets, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets, prepared by the great scientist Maya, the Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles.
Thank you. So this is very unusual, isn't it? Especially it's unusual to our conception of Lord Buddha, what we understand. So Srila Prabhupada, I'm just going to peek into the purport there, okay? Click into the purport because it's very interesting. So I'm going to read the translation again, and then if somebody could read some of the purport, okay? When the atheists, after being well versed in the Vedic scientific knowledge, annihilate the inhabitants of what? Of who? Different planets. Their interplanetary travel, flying unseen in the sky on well-built rockets prepared by the great scientist Maya. I thought everybody was lower than us before us. I thought we were the most advanced civilization. And they're saying people thousands and thousands of years ago and in different ages could go to other planets on well-built rockets. Wow, that's mind-blowing, isn't it? Okay. Okay, here goes what happened. The Lord will bewilder their minds by dressing himself attractively as Buddha and will preach on sub-religious principles. So there's a few things that are clarified in the purport. Okay, we have a volunteer on this side of the room for reading. Thanks. And Prabhupada clarifies right in the very beginning which Lord Buddha we're talking about.
This incarnation of Lord Buddha is not the same Buddha incarnation we have in the present history of mankind.
So did you know that there were more than one Buddhas? And that the different Buddhas have different sometimes, and all the different incarnations they come. This is the thing, sorry for the interruption on the first sentence, but this is the thing about understanding the history of the world through the Bhagavatam. We're not just learning this one little phase of time that we're in now, this one little section of the 4 yugas, you know, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Satya, Dwapara, Treta, and Kali Yuga. But we're learning about others because, and then when you think of it, because we've said 100,000 million quadrillion times, you're not your body, you're an eternal spirit soul. And if you're an eternal spirit soul, then there's something that happened before this, and there's something that's going to happen after this, and it's continually going on. And we're just looking at a little thing and say, oh yeah, I see everything really perfectly. Okay, continue. Thanks.
According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the Buddha incarnation mentioned in this verse appeared in different Kali age. In the duration of life of one Manu, there are more than 72 Kali Yugas. And in one of them, the particular type of Buddha mentioned here would appear. Lord Buddha incarnates at a time when the people are most materialistic and preaches common sense religious principles. Such ahimsa is not religious principle itself, but it is an important quality for persons who are actually religious. It is a common sense religion because one is advised to do no harm to any other animal or living being, because such harmful actions are equally harmful to he who does the harm.
Okay, we need to stop there. That's a really important point. Did you catch that point? Did somebody rephrase it in their own words? What was the point that was just made there? Why are those sub-religious principles important? Shantanu G.
When I'm hearing this, my mind is thinking about this incarnation of Buddha reminding the people about the general law of karma.
Yeah. Because sometimes we think ahimsa is just we're being kind to others, which is true. But why are we trying not to do any harm or violence to others? One other reason. What's the backstory reason or the backlash when one does harm to others? They suffer and we also suffer the reaction for that. And Prabhupada talks about it as it's common sense, and it is common sense. But we can see how in this age, common sense is not so common anymore, is it? We don't make that connection. It's an important connection to make. Please continue.
Is that because we're all one?
We're all one. That's a really interesting statement that could be picked apart. But if we accept the fact that we're all one in the sense that we're all not our bodies, we're all a spirit soul going through a material experience in a body, and that way we have a connection because why? We have the common father. So in that sense, yes, we're all one. But if one thinks we're all one because we're all one, that's not true. We're all one because we have a common father, the Supreme Lord. And therefore, and Prabhupada gives another really good example to understand about how one doesn't, we're all one. I forgot the point I was going to make. Sorry, it fell out. Go ahead. Oh, okay, it just came back. So a family man, so a father, let's say he has 10 children. And one of the children, let's say, has autism or something, it's challenged. So his older brothers think this guy's just a burden. Let's just kill him. Let's just get rid of him because like he's causing us so much botheration. So they go to the father and they say, Dad, we have a great idea. Let's kill this kid. You think Dad's going to be happy with that? No, he loves all his children. So similarly, when we as individuals are violent and cruel and mistreat other living entities, is the Lord going to be happy with us? No, because we are connected because we have a common Father. Okay, thank you.
But before learning these principles of nonviolence, one has to learn two other principles, namely to be humble and to be prideless. Unless one is humble and prideless, one cannot be harmless and nonviolent.
Want to read that one again, please?
Unless one is humble and prideless, one cannot be harmless and nonviolent. And after being nonviolent, one has to learn tolerance and simplicity of living. One must offer respect to the great religious preachers and spiritual leaders, and also train the senses for controlled action. Learning to be unattached to family and home, and enacting devotional service to the Lord, etc. At the ultimate stage, one has to accept the Lord and become his devotee. Otherwise, there is no religion. In religious principles, there must be God in the center. Otherwise, simple moral instructions are merely sub-religious principles, generally known as Upadharma, or nearness to religious principles.
So this is, thank you very kind. So this is the point that Srila Prabhupada's making about Lord Buddha. Lord Buddha's teachings in this incident, they were sub-religious principles. Why they were sub-religious principles? Because they didn't focus on God as the Supreme Personality. They focused on good qualities, which are important. They're important, and so that progression is listed there. One has to be harmless and nonviolent, but before being harmless and nonviolent, do you remember what it said you needed to have? Before harmlessness and nonviolence? Humble and pride. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because somebody who's arrogant, they don't care that what harm they do to others. You know? Anyway, so humble and prideless, and all sorts of other qualities were mentioned. But in and of themselves, those moral principles don't constitute religion. They constitute moral principles. But they're beneficial to cultivate on the path of spiritual progress. And ultimately, one needs to develop religion with God in the center. Okay, we're on 38. This is our focus verse. Could we have a reader for 38? Would you like to read, please?
Thereafter, at the end of Kali Yuga, where there exist no topics on the subject of God, even at the residence of so-called saints and respectful gentlemen of the third higher castes, and when the power of government is transferred to the hands of ministers elected from the low-born Shudra class or those less than them, and when nothing is known of the techniques of sacrifice, even by word, at that time the Lord will appear as the supreme chastiser
of the miscreants, chastiser. Okay, so I was been hearing a Srimad Bhagavatam overview class by Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj, and he takes a lot of his information from Srila Jiva Goswami's Satsandarbhas. So he was talking about, Maharaj was mentioning how the Sanskrit verses of the Bhagavatam are imbued with the spiritual potency so that we can ultimately understand them. They're purifying us so that we can ultimately understand the message of the Bhagavatam. So I'm giving you that information so that explain why we're not going to skip over the Sanskrit. We're going to read the Sanskrit really quickly. Okay, so click into the Sanskrit. And it's a long prose verse. It's like a Bhagavatam, Brahma Samhita tune. Okay. Yar hyalavesh apisatam nahare. Oh, that's my tune. Help me with the tune. Yahar alasya pisatam nahare katasyu. Yahar alasya pisatam nahare katasyu.
satam nahare katasyu.
Yahar alasyapi satam nahare katasyu. Pasandino dvijajana Rishalan rideva Pasandino Rishalan rideva Pasandino dvijajana Rishalan rideva Swaha Svadha Vasat iti smagiro nayatra. Shasta bhavishyati kaler bhagavan yugante. Shasta bhavishyati kaler bhagavan yugante. Okay, let's say it together, okay? All of us. Yar, we'll go slow, okay? Go slow because that's why you can pronounce as best you can. Go. Yar yalaleshapi satam nahare katasyu. Pasandino dvijajana vrishalan ridevaha. Svaha svadha vasaditi smagiro nayatra. Shasta bhavishyati kaler bhagavan yugante. And I'm going to very quickly read the word for word. And there's many words that Prabhupada talks about in the purport. Yari, when it happens, Allah Yeshu, in the residence of, Api, even, Satam, civilized gentlemen, Na, no, Hare, of the supreme, of the personality of Godhead, Kata, topics, Syu, will take place, Pasyandina, atheists, Dvijajana, persons declaring themselves to be the higher three classes, Brahmin, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, Vrishala, the lower class Sudras, Nri Devaha, ministers of the government, Svaha, hymns to perform sacrifices, Svadya, the ingredients to perform sacrifice, Vasat, the altar of sacrifice, Iti, all of these, Shma, shall, Gira, words, Na, never, Yatra, anywhere, Shasta, the chastiser, Bhavishyati, will appear, Kale, of the age of Kali, of the Kali age, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Yuga Ante, at the end of. So, one more time for the verse, please. Could you read the verse again? No, English, sorry, English.
Thereafter, at the end of Kali Yuga, when there exists no topics on the subject of God, even at the residence of so-called saints and respectable gentlemen of the three higher castes, and when the power of government is transferred to the hands of ministers elected from the low-born Sudra class or those less than them, and when nothing is known of the techniques of sacrifice, even by word, at that time the Lord will appear as the supreme chastiser.
Thank you. So what's being explained here is that obviously the different incarnations of the Lord, and they incarnate at different times of the creation. So one of the takeaways that we can get from the overall chapter is that the Lord is always there. He's always trying to rectify, trying to bring back, trying to wake up the living entities in the material world and attract them by his different activities according to time, place, and circumstances. He never leaves us bereft of the path to salvation. It manifests in different ways and in different times according to the circumstances, etc. It's covered over by different circumstances. And this incarnation of Kalki, the chastiser, who comes at the end of Kali Yuga, is an example of how even at the end of Kali Yuga, when there's we're just a few years into Kali Yuga, you could say. Kali Yuga lasts 4,336,000 years, a bunch of years, a bunch of years. And we're just like 5,000 years plus, a little bit plus into this Kali Yuga. Winter, it's winter season as far as qualities of human beings are concerned. It's the winter season. But even in the winter season, when the situation is harsh and cruel and this and that, and suffering is intense, there's still, the Lord still kindly appears. But he appears in a very unusual way. Okay, can we have somebody else read? Would you like to read? Thanks. And don't worry, I'm going to interrupt you very soon, okay?
Symptoms of the worst conditions of material world at the last stage of this age, called Kali Yuga, are stated herein. The sum and substance of such conditions is godlessness. Even the so-called saints in higher castes of social orders, generally known as the Vijjajanas, or the twice born, will become atheists. As such, all of them will practically forget even the holy name of the Lord and want to speak of his activities.
Okay, so thank you for now. What Srila Prabhupada is explaining is that in this Kali Yuga, things will degrade so low that people won't, there'll be so much atheism that there won't be any conception of God at all. So now you can see, okay, now there's clashes between atheistic type people and theistic type people or whatever. There's different clashes, but still there is many people who are attempting to be God conscious in following different practices. But as things degrade, but what you can see how godlessness and or simultaneously materialism is becoming so more pronounced than theism. You know, it's so much more pronounced, and the situation is not so pleasant. But can you imagine when atheism is so predominant that there's not even an alternative. There's not even God-fearing people in little pockets here or there. They don't even remember the names of God, and he has unlimited names. So that's like, you know, people know him by many different names in different circumstances. People don't even remember a name of God. How degraded that is, and how horrible. In the beginning of the movement, when Prabhupada was 26 Second Avenue, and he was just starting out, you know, there was one very famous person at the time, Allen Ginsberg, that became attracted to the movement and to Prabhupada and this and that. And so he would come and visit Srila Prabhupada every now and then on 26 Second Avenue, and they would have different conversations. So in one of the conversations, Allen Ginsberg was asking Srila Prabhupada, at the end of Kali Yuga, will your disciples suffer also? And Prabhupada said, my disciples will be gone. In other words, they'll be out of the material world by the end of Kali Yuga. And so then he was curious to know a little bit more about Kali Yuga. And Prabhupada said, at the end of Kali Yuga, he said to Alan, you will eat me and I will eat you. That's how degraded people will become. That they'll be eating cannibals. They'll be eating each other to survive. Why? Because no more wheat will be available, no more milk, no more sugar, no more grains, no more vegetables. Fruits will only be seeds with the skin on it. There'll be no fruit inside. It'll be so degraded. Because why? Because as people turn away from God in general, as people turn their backs on God and disregard the laws of the Lord, they get what we're talking about, the reaction for that. And the reaction is that, you know, there'll be flash floods and people will die in flash floods. There'll be wildfires and thousands of acres will burn up. There'll be tsunamis. Does any of that sound familiar? but to such an extent that nothing will grow in the end of Kali Yuga. Nothing will be growing. Nothing will survive. And so in order to survive, people will eat each other. Sad, huh? It's not just sad. That's, yeah. 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 Okay, continue on, please, if you don't mind.
The higher castes of society, namely the intelligent class of men, guiding the destinies of the social orders, the administrative class of men guiding the law and order of society, and the productive class of men guiding the economic development of society, must all be properly well versed in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. Knowing factually his name, quality, pastimes, entourage, paraphernalia, and personalities. The saints in the higher castes or orders of the society are judged by the proportion of knowledge in the signs of God, or tattva gyan, and not by any kind of birthright or bodily designation.
Okay, so this is another point that probably, again, he's making this point. It's not by birth, but it's by your knowledge of God. And so that makes that you develop qualities, and then they're therefore considered learned by the more one is aware of the Lord and his qualities, and one is considered more ignorant when he's not aware of those things. So he's saying that even in the higher castes, where the situation should be that they're hearing about the Lord and his qualities and pastimes and name and fame and entourage and knowing religious principles, that should be there. That which makes the system higher, the birthright higher. But even there, they're not hearing about the Lord. So how degraded it gets. But in the ideal circumstance, those in the higher positions, guided by their theistic tendency, can guide society. Those who are meant to defend the Kshatriyas, they have religious principles also. They're also guiding and making sure no one's transgressing those laws. And then those who are mercantile people, Vaishyas, dealing in trade and commerce, they also have a strong religious principle in their life, and therefore they're earning money in a relatively fair and just means. So when that's in place, then people in general can get good guidance and live in a proper in proper ways, so that they're making progress individually and collectively in higher knowledge and understanding that this isn't the place. This isn't our permanent home. We're here now because of different circumstances, but there's another world. But so Kali Yuga, as it progresses, as materialism becomes more and more prominent, which it's doing a great job these days, but when it becomes so prominent that there's no understanding at all of God, that's when, then we're going to hear about that. Keep going. This is the sign of such a degraded age. Go ahead.
Such designations, without any knowledge of the science of God, practical knowledge of service, are considered to be all decorations of dead bodies. And when there is too much inflation of these decorated dead bodies in society, there develop so many anomalies in the progressive, peaceful life of the human. Because of the lack of training or culture in the upper section of the social orders, there are no more to be designated as the
Vija?
Janus,
Yeah.
or the twice born. The significance of being twice born has been explained in many places in these great literatures. And again, one is reminded herewith that birth, executed by the sex life of the father and the mother, is called animal birth.
Okay, so let's just talk about not that particular instance specifically, but the concept that Prabhupada's talking about, twice born. So to be born once from your mother and father's union, that's a great accomplishment. That's your first birth. But your second birth, what's the second birth then? I can't hear you. Initiation, when one takes to spiritual life and takes their vows before their spiritual master in whatever field, that initiation, that's the second birth. That's Dvija bond. That's two. Now, even in our common experience, like birds, they're born twice too. Because first they come out as the egg, and then they gestate in the egg for some time, and then they crack out of their eggshell. So not like that, but this Dvija twice born that is referring to here is when the human being, after birth from the seminal discharge of the father and mother, etc., then they inquire into what's the real goal of life? What am I doing here? What's going on? and who's God? What's my relationship to God? That's the second verse. So that's important.
But such animal birth and progress of life on the animal principles of eating, sleeping, hearing, and mating, without any scientific, culture, or spiritual life, is called the Sudra life, or to be more explicit, the uncultured life of the lower class. It is stated herein that the governmental power of society in the Kali Yuga will be passed over to the uncultured, godless labor classes of men, and thus the devas, or the ministers
Ministers,
of the government, will be the Rasalas,
Rishalas.
or the uncultured lower class men of society.
Okay, so here we are. We're in the second canto. So Srila Prabhupada wrote these purports early on. He wrote the first canto, the first 3 volumes of the first canto, even before 1965, before he came to America. But so this is early 70s probably that Prabhupada's writing this. But you can see how it applies. It's as if he wrote it just yesterday, how the eternal principles are there, because he's talking about eternal principles, you know. And so when he's talking specifically here about ruling society in Kali Yuga, what's the symptom of one of the symptoms of Kali Yuga is that those in the government will be low class, uncultured, godless personalities that somehow or other, by hook or crook, have gotten some votes, usually the crook part, and maybe even the hook part too. But they've gotten some votes and they've been elected to the positions, but they don't have any concept of religious principles, and therefore they think that lying, cheating, and stealing are good, and insulting others are good. And not that I'm talking about anybody that we know in America, but you know, but it's a sign. So for us, we can see this is a sign of Kali Yuga. All this dissatisfaction and unrest is a sign of Kali Yuga. So there's still some more. So let's go on to the very last bit. Thank you.
No one can expect any peace and prosperity in a human society full of uncultured lower classes of men.
Want to say that again, please?
No one can expect any peace and prosperity in a human society full of uncultured lower classes of men. The symptoms of such uncultured social animals are already
in vogue,
and it is the duty of the leaders of men to take note of it and try to reform the social order by introducing the principles of twice-born men trained in the science of God consciousness. This can be done by expanding the culture of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. In the degraded condition of human society, the Lord incarnates as the Kalki avatar and kills all the demonic without mercy.
Yeah, so this is the very end sentence tells you a little bit about the activities of Lord Kalki. So he says that he incarnates in the Kalki as the Kalki avatar, and he kills all the demoniac without mercy. So later on, there'll be a little bit more elaborate description of the activities of Kalki. But interestingly enough, Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't leave anything to doubt or speculation. So in this day and age, it's quite common that different personalities claim to be an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. But you'll notice all the incarnations that have been mentioned so far, and the ones that will be also mentioned in the future verses, there's very specific information given about them, where they take birth, maybe the area, maybe even the specific place, the names of their father and mother, the activities that they perform, the mission that they have. All of that is very clearly explained in the Bhagavatam. So, and Srila Prabhupada would often point out how simple it is to check on the credentials of the so-called person claiming to be an incarnation of the Lord. Where is he mentioned in the Bhagavatam? Where is he mentioned in the list? Where is, you know, who is here in even this Kalki avatar? It'll mention his father's name, the village that he was born in, and his activities. It's all very clearly mentioned. But but some person who might have some, you know, mystic potency and be able to produce small pebbles or gold or pieces of whatever they have some potency there, but what are their, can they lift Govardhan Hill? Can they do this? Can they do that? You know, there's no common sense, you know, checking of credentials of just because people are intelligence are clouded, and that person is might be an empowered cheater. People are swept up by those things. So here's one of our benefits is of hearing from this Srimad Bhagavatam is that the information is so full and it's so beyond our ability to comprehend all of it anyway, but it's there for us to become familiar with. Become familiar with the Bhagavatam, become familiar with the purports. Don't get super intimidated that there happens to be so many volumes of the Bhagavatam that you think, oh, I'll never be able to finish them, so therefore I'm not even going to try. But no, become familiar with it. Read, Srila Prabhupada would tell us, he told us that even if you just read one chapter a day of the verses of the Bhagavatam, you can go back to Godhead. And then he would clarify it again. Then he said, even if you just read one verse, you'll be benefited. Even if you just read one line, you'll be benefited. You know what I mean? So the purification is there, and it's a question, and that's our opportunity. We have this human form of life, and that's your opportunity because you become attracted somehow or other to this Krishna consciousness movement in this stage of your life. So take advantage of it. Become familiar with, even if the comprehension of all the minute details might be difficult in the beginning, but the more you become familiar with it, the more the purification will take place, and the more the benefit will be there. And let's just go to verse 39. We'll just read the verse there, and then if there's any discussion or comments. How about in the back row? Anybody want to volunteer? Oh, sure, certainly.
Well, at the beginning of creation, there
There
are penance, myself, Brahma, and the Prajapatis, the great sages who generate. Then during the maintenance of creation, there are Lord, Vishnu, and demigods controlling the powers. And the kings are different planets. But at the end, there is irreligion, and then Lord Shiva and the atheists full of anger, etc. All of them are different representations of manifestations of the energy of the supreme power, the Lord.
Thank you. So this last verse that we're covering briefly today is talking about, again, the different cycles. In other words, he's talking about the modes of passion, how the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance are predominating at different times. In the beginning of creation, the mode of goodness is predominated. And there are symptoms of penance, and the Prajapatis and all people who are following religious principles. So there's a predominance in the mode of goodness, and therefore things are more conducive to spiritual life. Then during the maintenance takes a little bit of passion. So there's, nope, it takes Lord Vishnu, sorry, I blew that one, sorry. But he has the powers to control, etc., to maintain it. And then in the end, when ignorance is predominant, then Lord Shiva is in charge, and his qualities are destruction and etc., and atheists full of anger. So that influence is there at different times according to the different modes of nature, and all of that energy are just different representatives of the energy of the supreme power of the Lord. Interesting, you know. Anyway, comments, questions, takeaways, reflections? Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I really get what the Kali Yuga, how the things the bad is, how the things will be bad and bad. I understand why, because now only we see that if you are like according to the text we seen today, you should be humble and prideless.
Yes.
If you are humble and prideless, people think you are not like a learned person. You are not a commander, or you don't have any capability as a leader.
Yes.
So you people, like the leaders are the things they think that they are command the people, but
Yes.
humble people cannot do that, and
Right.
also the priceless people cannot do that. So now only we seeing those things as progress to the end of Kali Yuga. I understand now why the things have get so bad, because
Because
this is
there's
a-
too
this
many
is-
humble and people,
Yeah.
too many humble and prideless people, and therefore things got really bad. Is that
Thank
where you're
you.
going? True and false, if you like, if I could say, because it's just because Srila Prabhupada, if you think of Srila Prabhupada and Prabhupada's activities, you wouldn't think of him as, a wimp. You'd think of him as strong. He spoke so strongly. He spoke, and he wasn't afraid to confront a big, huge scientist and say, life doesn't come from chemicals. It comes from matter. It comes from spirit. Life comes from life. He wasn't afraid to confront them. He wasn't afraid to confront government officials and tell them, stop these abortions and, so many things. So he was very strong. And at the same time, when you think of Srila Prabhupada's qualities, he was extremely humble and submissive too, because he was humble to the order of his spiritual master, he was submissive to his spiritual master, etc., etc. And therefore, another example could be given is sometimes when Srila Prabhupada encouraged the early disciples and all of the disciples to continually go out and distribute this knowledge, distribute books. Now, going out, and those of you who've had that opportunity, it's not the easiest thing in the world to stop somebody and try to give them some literature, spiritual literature, when they're absorbed in a whole different lifestyle, etc., etc. So it would take a bold, strong personality to be able to do that. And so when some of the ladies would be distributing books, they would get a little confused. And so one of the girls asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, you always tell us to be, especially in a woman's body, to be humble and chaste and this and that. And then we have to go out on book distribution. And it's such the opposite type of a nature. And Prabhupada said, you should be just like a lion in the chase and humble at home, to your point. That it's not, so it often comes up that people think, well, if you're humble and submissive, you're going to get exploited really easily. You're not going to make progress in your work. You're not going to get, promotions to higher levels and more responsibility. But actually, it's a question of how it's used. One can be humbly assertive. No, I'm sorry, I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat that. That's like, you know what I mean? You can be assertive in the same way, but you can present it in a humble way. So it takes a little bit of an art to develop the both simultaneously, but it's not because people are cultivating humility and a humble attitude that the situation becomes degraded. It's because we need to cultivate our God-centered activities, and then we can be simultaneously humble in the right circumstance and forceful when proper force has to be there. Hare Krishna. Other comments or questions or reflections? Okay, so like I said, in your spare time, I'm sure you have lots of spare time around here in Krishna House. Go through these, become familiar with the incarnations, become familiar with what you're reading, try to read the purports, and discuss it with your friends. Then you'll have something nice to talk about. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaura Premanandi, Adi Adi Bol. Yay.